Detective Maya Jackson bleeds out on cold pavement as rain washes her blood into storm drains. Her final text sends evidence implicating 6 fellow officers in racist brutality cases. Across town, her husband David receives the message seconds before his phone rings with news of her accidental shooting. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more true crime stories about corruption in our justice system. The thin blue line just got thinner, and you won't believe how this grieving husband uses his CIA skills to bring down an entire corrupt police department. Maya Jackson had been a decorated detective in Westport City for 15 years, working tirelessly to bridge racial divides in a department with deeply entrenched prejudice. She had grown up in this city watching her father face discrimination as one of the first black business owners in the downtown district, which fueled her desire to change the system from within. The police force had been resistant to diversity, with only 8% of officers being people of color, despite the city's 40% minority population. Maya had fought her way through the academy, enduring racial slurs whispered in locker rooms and finding her locker vandalized with hate speech more than once. Still, she persevered, believing that representation mattered and that she could make a difference one arrest report at a time. Her persistence had earned her a detective shield and the begrudging respect of some colleagues, though others viewed her success as an affirmative action handout rather than the result of her exceptional clearance rate. She met David during a veterans outreach program where she volunteered, connecting instantly with the quiet intelligence operative whose eyes seemed to hold secrets from countries most Americans couldn't locate on a map. David had been struggling with reintegration after 20 years. In covert operations, his nightmares populated with faces of assets he couldn't save, and operations gone sideways in dusty, forgotten corners of the world. In Maya, he found an anchor to normalcy, someone who understood duty and sacrifice without needing classified details. They married after a year of dating, creating a sanctuary in their craftsman bungalow on the edge of town where they could leave the weight of their professional burdens at the door. 2 weeks before her death, Maya noticed discrepancies in arrest reports involving black suspects from the Riverside district. The paperwork showed a pattern of possession charges that seemed formulaic, with the same quantities of drugs and nearly identical officer narratives across dozens of cases. What caught her attention was that Officer Raymond Wilson, a precinct golden boy with political connections, appeared in 90% of these arrests, despite being assigned to different sectors during those shifts. Maya began discreetly pulling bodycam footage, finding disturbing gaps in recording during critical moments of these arrests. When continuous footage existed, she observed suspicious movements, suggesting evidence planting, with Wilson approaching suspects empty-handed, but discovering drugs after minimal searches. Maya confided in her one trusted colleague, Sergeant Tamara Wright, about the disturbing pattern. Tamara, a 15-year veteran who had faced her own battles with discrimination, confirmed seeing similar issues but admitted to staying silent out of fear. Together, they documented black suspects reporting planted evidence, excessive force, and shakedowns for protection money from small businesses in predominantly black neighborhoods. Maya's investigation led her to Lieutenant Warren Phillips, a precinct supervisor with a reputation for making problems disappear. When she presented her concerns with carefully organized evidence, Phillips dismissed her with thinly veiled threats about staying in her lane and reminders about the importance of police solidarity in dangerous times. His pale blue eyes had remained cold, as he reminded her that troublemakers don't last long in this department, regardless of their skin color. Despite department protocol prohibiting unauthorized copying of evidence, Maya secretly downloaded bodycam footage showing Wilson and others planting drugs on black teenagers near Lincoln High School. The footage clearly showed Officer Wilson removing something from his pocket before finding it in a teenager's backpack, while Officer Bryant held the boy against a wall, his knee pressing dangerously against the child's neck. The Internal Affairs investigator, Detective Simmons, promised to look into it when Maya brought him heavily redacted information, but his reluctance was apparent in how quickly he shuffled her out of his office and his failure to follow up in the following days. The night before her death, Maya confessed to David that she'd uncovered something bigger than isolated incidents of racism or corruption. She had connected the dots between systematic targeting of black neighborhoods and Captain Thomas Reeves, a decorated 25-year veteran with direct lines to City Hall. The pattern showed strategic enforcement in neighborhoods being eyed for redevelopment with arrests and harassment, increasing precisely when property developers showed interest in acquisition. Maya didn't share specific details with David, telling him only that she was meeting with an FBI contact the next day to hand over evidence too dangerous to keep. "These people have connections everywhere, David," she had whispered as they sat on their back porch, the cicadas providing cover for their conversation. "I can't risk you knowing more than necessary. If something happens to me..." David had stopped her, unable to entertain the thought, assuring her that nothing would happen because she was a respected officer. Yet Maya's caution led her to create contingencies, carefully hiding a backup flash drive in the false bottom of an old jewelry box that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had marched with Dr. King and taught Maya that justice requires courage in the face of fear. David's grief transformed into calculated rage when the department ruled Maya's death an unfortunate friendly fire incident after just 3 days of superficial investigation. The official report claimed she had stepped into the line of fire during a drug bust gone wrong with Officer Wilson, identified as the shooter, but immediately cleared of wrongdoing. No disciplinary action was recommended, not even mandatory retraining. The departmental statement praised Wilson's record, while subtly implying Maya had violated protocol by being in an unexpected position. The internal investigation ignored witness statements from the scene describing arguments before shots were fired, and failed to explain why Maya's body was found 20 yards from where the supposed shootout occurred. At her funeral, the department presented a united front of solemn faces and polished badges, but David's trained eye caught the subtle tells of insincerity. Captain Reeves stood stiffly at attention, his eyes scanning the crowd rather than focusing on the casket. Lieutenant Phillips checked his watch 3 times during the eulogy. Officers Wilson, Bryant, Walton, and Mercer clustered together their whispered comments, causing occasional inappropriate smirks. None showed genuine remorse or the shock that should accompany the accidental killing of a colleague. The mayor delivered a hollow speech about Maya's service and sacrifice, throwing in buzzwords about community policing and diversity that Maya had actually believed in, but the department had actively undermined. David recognized the political theater for what it was, watching city officials position themselves as champions of progress while nodding respectfully to the very officers who perpetuated the systemic racism Maya had died fighting against. The black officers in attendance stood separately, their isolation visible even in mourning their expressions, conveying a grim understanding that this could have been any of them. In the days following the funeral, while well-meaning friends filled his kitchen with casseroles he couldn't stomach, David discovered Maya's hidden flash drive tucked into the false bottom of her grandmother's jewelry box. The contents confirmed his darkest suspicions and revealed horrors beyond even his imagination. The drive contained meticulously organized folders of bodycam footage, financial records, text messages, and Maya's detailed notes documenting a criminal enterprise operating within the department. The evidence showed the 6 officers targeting black businesses for protection money, planting evidence on young men who refused to become informants, and brutalizing those who dared to file complaints. Most disturbing were recordings of Captain Reeves instructing officers on which neighborhoods to clean up just before property developers submitted proposals to the city for revitalization projects. The same developer names appeared in Captain Reeves' personal bank deposits days after particularly aggressive sweep operations displaced residents and forced businesses to close. When David approached District Attorney Helena Okafor, with the evidence she seemed genuinely outraged but quickly tempered her response. "I believe you and I believed in Maya," she said, her Nigerian accent becoming more pronounced with her emotion. "But you need to understand what we're up against. These officers have connections to Judge Martin Slater, who can bury any case against them. He's dismissed every police misconduct case that's crossed his bench for 15 years. Without ironclad evidence and witnesses willing to testify, we can't win." She advised David to pursue federal channels instead, but her office assistant gave David a knowing look that suggested even those avenues might be compromised. While David grappled with his options, grief giving way to strategic thinking honed through years of field operations, he returned home one evening to find the lock on his back door subtly damaged. Drawing the sidearm he'd kept since his CIA days, he cleared rooms with practiced efficiency until he encountered Officer Mercer rifling through Maya's home office. The confrontation was brief but revealing. After disarming the startled officer, David used restraint techniques that left Mercer conscious but compliant. "You don't understand what you're getting into," Mercer gasped as David secured him to an office chair. This goes higher than you know. With methodical precision reminiscent of his interrogation training, David extracted the truth. Maya's death wasn't an accident, but a deliberate execution, approved at the highest levels of the department. She wouldn't let it go. Mercer admitted fear, loosening his tongue. Wilson was just following orders. We all were. Before releasing Mercer with a warning that would ensure his silence, David learned of an upcoming meeting where all 6 corrupt officers would be present to coordinate their response to the growing community pressure for an independent investigation. Rather than calling authorities, David left Mercer unconscious, but alive, his service weapon emptied and disassembled. That night, David cleared out the spare bedroom, converting it into an operations center, with maps of the city surveillance equipment acquired through old contacts and profiles of each officer involved in the corruption ring. The grieving husband disappeared, replaced by the intelligence operative who had tracked targets across 3 continents. On the wall, he placed Maya's academy graduation photo beside the crime scene photos he'd obtained through a forensic contact. "I'll get them all," he promised her image. "Every last one." David's military background emerged from the shadows of his quiet civilian life, revealing 20 years in elite intelligence operations with specializations in extraction, infiltration, and interrogation. His personnel file, heavily redacted, even within the CIA, documented operations across Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, with particular expertise in dismantling criminal networks embedded within government structures. He had been honorably discharged after being captured and tortured during an operation in Chechnya, where he endured 3 weeks of systematic abuse before orchestrating an escape that freed 2 other captured operatives. The experience left him with a distinctive scar running from his right temple to his jaw nerve damage in his left hand that he disguised with practiced dexterity and psychological scars that manifested in hypervigilance and insomnia. Only Maya had understood these wounds, having seen similar trauma in veterans she counseled. She had been his anchor to normalcy, helping him channel his tactical thinking into community service projects and home renovations instead of threat assessments and escape routes. Now, with her gone, the carefully constructed civilian identity fell away, like a tactical disguise no longer needed for the mission. Have you ever wondered how someone trained to disappear into foreign countries and assume new identities would apply those skills in pursuing justice on American soil? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think David is justified in using his special forces training against corrupt cops, or number 2 if you believe he should still work within the system, despite its failures. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're invested in seeing how this grieving husband transforms into an unstoppable force of vengeance. David conducted meticulous surveillance on all 6 officers, documenting their routines, weaknesses, vices, and sins, with the same precision he once used to track terrorist financiers. He established observation posts in apartments overlooking their homes, using specialized equipment to photograph visitors and record conversations through windows. He placed tracking devices on their personal vehicles, mapped their regular routes, and identified their unauthorized stops at businesses in black neighborhoods. Officer Bryant's activities proved particularly illuminating, as David documented him extorting protection money from black business owners under the guise of building code violations. Bryant would enter establishments during slow hours, point out alleged violations that could unfortunately result in closure, then suggest that his consulting services could resolve these issues for a modest weekly fee. Store owners recognized the shakedown for what it was, but saw no recourse in a system where Bryant's fellow officers would be the ones responding to any complaints. David recorded these interactions using techniques that ensured admissibility as evidence, then anonymously sent the footage to local journalist Rebecca Chen, whose investigative reporting on police misconduct had earned her both awards and threats. Chen began investigating Bryant's pattern, publishing a series that carefully avoided revealing her source, while questioning how an officer's salary supported his recently purchased vacation property and boat. This created the first cracks in the officer's sense of invulnerability, introducing the fear that someone was watching. The surveillance revealed other vulnerabilities: Wilson's gambling debts at an underground casino, Walton's steroid abuse and violent outbursts against his girlfriend Phillips, meetings with known drug distributors, and Reeves's weekly visits to a storage facility that didn't appear in any of his financial records. Meanwhile, Sergeant Tamara Wright reached out to David, arranging a meeting in the children's section of the public library, where surveillance would be difficult amid the colorful bookshelves and bustling activity. Maya tried to do this the right way, she explained, her voice low, as she pretended to read a picture book to mask their conversation. She documented everything, built an airtight case, and they still killed her for it. Tamara revealed she had tried to help Maya take the evidence to the FBI, but was stonewalled when their contact suddenly transferred to another field office. She suspected Captain Reeves had connections even in federal agencies, explaining the mysterious roadblocks Maya encountered when attempting to secure outside intervention. Tamara provided crucial information about Officer Wilson, identifying him as the most vulnerable of the group. He's newer, only 5 years on the force. The others have been running this operation for over a decade, but Wilson was recruited after they caught him planting evidence to boost his arrest numbers. Instead of reporting him, they brought him into their circle, using the original misconduct as blackmail to ensure his cooperation. Tamara wanted justice through legal means, establishing a civilian review board and pressuring the state attorney general to investigate. She was unaware of David's darker intentions, seeing in his solemn nods a fellow seeker of institutional accountability rather than a man planning calculated retribution. Would you trust the system that failed your loved one, or would you take matters into your own hands when that system protected their killers? At the neighborhood community center, where Maya had volunteered teaching financial literacy to teenagers, David met community organizer Marcus Davis, whose friendship with Maya had begun during protests over a police shooting 3 years earlier. While Maya had worked within the system, Marcus organized outside it, building community support networks and documenting police interactions. He shared with David stories of the officers' brutality that never made official reports, teenagers beaten for resisting arrest when asking why they were being detained, single mothers threatened with child protective services if they didn't provide information on neighbors, elderly residents intimidated into selling their homes at fractions of market value to developers connected to Captain Reeves. Maya was different, Marcus explained as they sat in his cluttered office, papered with community event flyers and Know Your Rights posters. She believed change was possible from inside. I respected her for it, even when I thought she was fighting a losing battle. He showed David a community database of police misconduct that residents had built when official complaints disappeared from department records. The incidents corroborated Maya's evidence, showing the same officers repeatedly targeting the same neighborhoods with escalating aggression. Marcus had been building a civil rights case with a coalition of community groups, gathering affidavits and documentation that could support a Department of Justice pattern or practice investigation. David recognized potential allies in Marcus and his network, but kept his true plans hidden. "I'm just trying to understand what happened to Maya," he said, the practice deception coming easily from years of fieldcraft. She would want her work to continue. As he left the community center, David's phone alerted him to movement at Officer Walton's residence. The hunter had identified his first target, and now it was time to move from surveillance to action. How far would you go to bring your spouse's killers to justice? Like this video, if you're ready to see David deliver the vengeance that the justice system won't. Officer Walton, the most physically abusive of the corrupt group, finished his shift at midnight and stopped at the Blue Line, a bar frequented by officers where complaints about animals in the Riverside district flowed as freely as the whiskey. He consumed 4 drinks while bragging about a recent arrest where he had taught a mouthy perp some respect, mimicking the sound of breaking bones to appreciative laughter from off-duty colleagues. Security cameras captured him, leaving alone at 1:15 in the morning, weaving slightly, as he walked to his black SUV, with tinted windows and custom rims purchased with unexplained income. The cameras didn't capture the shadow that followed him home, moving with the practiced invisibility of someone trained to operate in hostile territory without detection. Walton arrived at his suburban home at 1:40, fumbling with his house keys before entering through the front door. He reappeared moments later, in his attached garage, opening a gun safe hidden behind storage shelves. From it, he removed a small package of white powder and several stacks of cash, likely proceeds from the protection racket he ran in Riverside businesses. As he counted the money, the garage door silently closed behind him. The next morning, Walton was found by his girlfriend, brutally beaten, but alive, his body positioned deliberately with his police bodycam forced down his throat. His fingers were broken in the same pattern as those of Jamal Robinson, a 17-year-old honor student whose resisting arrest had resulted in similar injuries 3 months earlier. A flash drive taped to Walton's chest contained footage from his own bodycam showing him planting evidence during Robinson's arrest, footage that had supposedly been corrupted in the official record. Most disturbing to the responding officers was the level of professional skill evident in the attack. Walton, a former amateur boxer known for his fighting prowess, had defensive wounds indicating he had tried to fight back, but landed no significant blows on his attacker. The beating had been methodical, rather than emotional, with injuries precisely calculated to cause maximum pain without risk of death. No fingerprints, fibers, or DNA were found, despite the extensive physical confrontation, suggesting an assailant with professional knowledge of forensic countermeasures. Walton himself could provide no useful description, as his attacker had disabled the garage lights and approached from behind. However, he appeared genuinely terrified, refusing to return to his home and requesting transfer to administrative duty. The other corrupt officers reacted with panic, rather than the solidarity typically shown when an officer is attacked. Captain Reeves called an emergency meeting in a restaurant private room, swept for listening devices, ordering the remaining officers to implement emergency security protocols. This wasn't random, he insisted, his normally composed demeanor showing cracks of anxiety. Someone targeted Walton specifically, and knew about the Robinson kid. They made it personal. Lieutenant Phillips suggested gang retaliation, noting increased Riverside Crips activity following recent drug arrests. We hit their supply houses hard last month. This could be payback. But Officer Wilson seemed unconvinced, having witnessed David's military bearing at Maya's funeral. Jackson's husband was special forces or intelligence. Maya mentioned it once, said he had done things for the government that gave him nightmares. The suggestion hung in the air, met with dismissive scoffs that failed to hide their underlying concern. He's a civilian contractor now, Reeves countered. Some corporate security job pushing papers. Besides, we've had him under surveillance since the funeral. He goes to work, comes home occasionally, visits her grave. Nothing suspicious. None mentioned the surveillance gaps or the times David's car remained in his driveway while his phone signal stayed home, details that might have alerted them to his counterintelligence training. Captain Reeves ordered the officers to travel in pairs and increase home security, unwittingly making them more predictable targets by constraining their movements to recognizable patterns. Lieutenant Phillips began investigating Maya's active cases, worried that something they had missed in her files might be coming back to haunt them. Check everything she was working on, he ordered Detective Simmons, who had originally cleared Wilson in Maya's shooting. Find out who she was talking to in the weeks before the incident. Only Officer Wilson seemed truly afraid, having been the one who pulled the trigger on Maya. He installed additional security cameras at his residence and began varying his routes to work, demonstrating the survival instinct that made him dangerous. His precautions indicated he understood they were being hunted by someone with professional skills, rather than facing standard criminal retaliation. Detective Simmons, pressured by growing media attention from Rebecca Chen's articles about Bryant's unexplained wealth, reopened Maya's death investigation. The official reason cited procedural concerns that required additional witness interviews, but the real motivation was damage control as public trust in the department plummeted. Simmons requested a meeting with David, ostensibly to tie up loose ends in the case file. They met at a diner near the precinct, a public location where Simmons felt secure, but that also prevented him from speaking freely. David played his role perfectly, the grieving husband struggling with anger, but cooperating with authorities. I just want to understand what happened, he said, maintaining eye contact with a vulnerability that disarmed Simmons' suspicion. The report says she was shot from 30 feet away, but the powder burns on her uniform suggested a much closer range. Simmons shifted uncomfortably, revealing his awareness of the discrepancy. Sometimes initial findings are revised as more evidence comes in, he offered weakly. David pressed gently, using the conversation to gather information about the department's suspicions while appearing to be merely seeking closure. Their interaction revealed that Simmons wasn't corrupt himself, just overworked and initially deceived by fabricated evidence his colleagues had planted. Now faced with inconsistencies he couldn't ignore, the detective seemed genuinely disturbed by the implications. I want to do right by Detective Jackson, he admitted, as they parted. She deserved better than this. Meanwhile, Officer Bryant, paranoid after Walton's attack, responded to a routine traffic stop with excessive force, drawing his weapon unnecessarily on a black teenager whose taillight was out. The boy made the mistake of reaching for his registration too quickly, and Bryant fired, claiming he saw a weapon that turned out to be a cell phone. The teenager survived but was paralyzed from the waist down, igniting community outrage that had been building since Maya's death. Protesters gathered outside the precinct demanding Bryant's arrest, creating the perfect distraction for David's next move. Behind the scenes, Judge Martin Slater called an emergency meeting with Captain Reeves, demanding the situation be controlled before federal authorities took notice. "The last thing we need is a civil rights investigation," he warned. "Make this go away, or our friends in City Hall will find more cooperative partners for their development projects." The threat was clear: solve the problem, or be replaced by others willing to maintain the corrupt system that benefited them all. As protests intensified and department resources focused on crowd control, David prepared to escalate his campaign against those who had taken Maya from him. The next target would not receive the relatively merciful treatment Walton had experienced. David anonymously contacted Officer Wilson, the triggerman in Maya's death, sending a text message from an untraceable number. "I know it was ordered. Maya's flash drive shows everything. Meet alone or evidence goes public tomorrow." The message included details only someone with access to Maya's files would know, establishing credibility while instilling fear. After initial hesitation and a panicked call to Captain Reeves that went straight to voicemail, Wilson agreed to meet at an abandoned warehouse, scheduled for demolition to make way for luxury condominiums, one of the development projects. Connected to Judge Slater's investment portfolio, Wilson arrived armed and visibly nervous, jumping at shadows in the cavernous space where support columns created natural hiding places amid construction debris. David observed him from multiple vantage points before making contact, assessing his target's mental state and confirming he had come alone despite orders to travel with a partner. "She knew, didn't she?" David's voice echoed through the space, making it impossible for Wilson to identify his location. "She knew you were following her that day." Wilson spun around, weapon drawn but shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about. Who are you?" But the tremor in his voice betrayed his lie. David gradually revealed himself, approaching with hands visible to show he carried no weapon, projecting a confidence that unnerved Wilson more than threats could have. "Maya built a case against all of you," David continued, stopping at a distance just beyond lunging reach. "But she specifically noted that you were different from the others. Newer, possibly salvageable." The observation hit its mark, playing on Wilson's self-image, as someone who had made mistakes but wasn't fundamentally corrupt like his colleagues. After tense negotiation and a carefully orchestrated demonstration that David could have killed him multiple times during his approach, Wilson's resolve cracked. He revealed that Maya's death had been ordered by someone higher than Captain Reeves, someone with connections to city government protecting a lucrative operation running through Westport's port facilities. They import through shipping containers registered to shell companies. Wilson explained the confession pouring out once his resistance broke. The product moves through specific officers to distributors in neighboring counties. The protection racket and evidence planting are just side operations to control territory and ensure friendly judges handle any cases that reach court. He admitted to shooting Maya, describing how Captain Reeves had ordered him to handle the problem after Maya was seen photographing a warehouse where shipments were processed. "They said it would look like an accident during a drug bust. I didn't know they meant I would have to shoot another officer." His voice broke, revealing the guilt that had been consuming him since pulling the trigger. "I just wanted to make detective. I never signed up for killing cops." David offered Wilson a choice immunity in exchange for testimony against the others, or becoming the next officer found beaten within inches of his life. The young officer chose cooperation, agreeing to wear a wire to an upcoming meeting with Captain Reeves, while providing David with access codes to secure areas of the precinct where additional evidence was stored. Meanwhile, Rebecca Chen published explosive evidence of racial profiling from the files David had anonymously provided, revealing that black drivers in Westport were 6 times more likely to be searched during traffic stops than white drivers, despite contraband being found more frequently in vehicles driven by white residents. The statistical analysis was irrefutable, triggering an official state investigation into departmental practices. Mayor Wilson publicly promised transparency, while privately ordering Captain Reeves to contain the situation by any means necessary. "I don't care what you have to do," the mayor told Reeves during a closed-door meeting in a municipal golf course clubhouse. "Make this go away before my re-election campaign. Your retirement package depends on it." Reeves, feeling pressure from multiple directions, assigned Lieutenant Phillips to handle the journalist problem. Phillips interpreted this direction as authorization to silence Rebecca Chen, permanently unaware that David had anticipated this move based on similar patterns in authoritarian regimes he had infiltrated overseas. When Phillips broke into Chen's apartment that night to destroy evidence and stage a robbery gone wrong, he found himself walking into a trap. David subdued him with techniques refined in countless black operations, using pressure points and leverage, rather than brute force to neutralize the larger man, without leaving defensive wounds that could later become evidence. With Phillips secured to a dining chair with his own handcuffs, David methodically broke down his resistance, using psychological techniques, rather than physical torture, exploiting the lieutenant's fear of public humiliation and loss of pension. "Your colleagues will turn on you the moment they're threatened," David explained calmly while showing Phillips surveillance photos of Captain Reeves meeting with Judge Slater. "They're already preparing you as the scapegoat. Why protect them when they won't do the same for you?" The approach worked. Phillips revealed that Judge Slater had personally authorized Maya's murder, fearing she would expose his role in dismissing cases against white officers, while maximizing sentences for black defendants. The judge had a financial stake in private prisons, operated by Cornerstone Corrections Corporation, earning dividends that increased with occupancy rates. "The judge gets paid when cells are filled," Phillips explained bitterly. "We deliver the bodies he ensures. Convictions everybody profits." Rather than killing Phillips, David implemented a more poetic justice. He injected the lieutenant with a cocktail of drugs from police evidence lockers, carefully dosed to ensure incapacitation without life-threatening effects. He then planted evidence in Phillips's vehicle, connecting him to missing evidence in multiple drug cases, positioning him as the weak link in the corruption chain. An anonymous tip led patrol officers to discover their lieutenant incoherent in his car outside a known drug house with stolen evidence and unexplained cash in his trunk. Phillips was arrested by his own colleagues, his credibility destroyed, and his usefulness to the conspiracy ended. The remaining officers realized they were being systematically dismantled by someone with intimate knowledge of their operations and tactics. Officer Bryant, the most volatile and least intelligent of the group, attempted to flee the city after Phillips' arrest. He packed hastily, throwing clothes and documentation into a suitcase, while constantly checking windows for surveillance. He made it 3 miles outside city limits before David, who had anticipated this reaction based on psychological profiles he had compiled, forced Bryant's vehicle off the road onto an isolated service lane. Unlike the calculated violence used against Walton or the psychological manipulation employed with Phillips, David's confrontation with Bryant exposed the officer's raw hatred. When cornered, Bryant abandoned all pretense of professional conduct, revealing the pathological racism that had drawn him to law enforcement. "You people don't understand your place," he spat, as David approached his disabled vehicle. "I joined to keep animals like you in line. Your bitch wife thought she could change things, but the system is bigger than her. Bigger than you." David recorded Bryant's racist tirade using equipment that captured both audio and video with courtroom-admissible quality. Rather than responding with violence to the provocations, he maintained cold professionalism, allowing Bryant to incriminate himself completely. When Bryant finally lunged with a hidden backup weapon, David disarmed him with efficient movements that left the officer with a dislocated shoulder but no life-threatening injuries. The recording of Bryant's unfiltered hatred, including admissions of evidence planting and excessive force against black suspects, was anonymously sent to every media outlet in the state. The department immediately placed Bryant on administrative leave pending investigation, but the damage to their public image was irreparable. Community protests intensified with even moderate voices, now calling for complete departmental overhaul. As 3 of the 6 corrupt officers were neutralized, Captain Reeves and Judge Slater realized the methodical nature of what they were facing. This wasn't random retaliation, but a coordinated campaign by someone with professional training in dismantling organizations. Someone who understood that removing key personnel would force the remaining conspirators to take increasingly desperate measures that would expose their criminal enterprise. Someone executing a plan with the precision and patience of a trained intelligence operative. They began to accept that David Jackson might be far more dangerous than they had initially believed. Captain Reeves' desperation, evident in his haggard appearance and bloodshot eyes, reached out to his political protector, State Senator Victor Harmon, via a burner phone designated for emergencies. They arranged to meet at Harmon's lakeside cabin, a property purchased through shell companies, to hide the connection between the corrupt politician and police captain. The cabin's isolated location offered privacy for their conversation, but David had anticipated this meeting, having identified the property through financial records obtained from Judge Slater's computer during a covert entry of this chambers. Everything is falling apart. Reeves explained, pacing across the cabin's expensive hardwood floors, while Harmon remained seated, his calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the captain's agitation. Phillips arrested Bryant, suspended Wilson, acting strange. Someone's targeting us, specifically someone who knows details only Maya Jackson could have collected. Senator Harmon, who chaired the Criminal Justice Committee and controlled law enforcement budgets throughout the state, maintained the practiced composure of a career politician. His silver hair and tailored suit projected authority, even in this remote setting, though his words revealed the ruthlessness beneath the polished exterior. This is exactly why I advised eliminating her quietly, rather than the spectacle you created, he reminded Reeves coldly. A detective dying from an apparent heart attack raises fewer questions than a shooting with witnesses. He drummed manicured fingers against an oak desk, considering options with the calculation of someone accustomed to managing inconvenient problems. Your incompetence has created unnecessary exposure. I'm expecting the governor to announce a state investigation by the end of the week, which I can delay, but not prevent indefinitely. Harmon promised to leverage his influence to shut down inquiries, but demanded that all loose ends be eliminated immediately, including Officer Wilson, whom he suspected of cooperating with authorities based on surveillance reports from private security contractors on his payroll. Wilson visited the federal building yesterday, Harmon revealed, showing Reeves photographs taken by his security team. 40 minutes unaccounted for. He's turning. Is it surprising that corruption reaches all the way up to state government? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think the entire system needs to be dismantled and rebuilt, or number 2 if you believe reform is still possible within the Rousing existing structure. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how deep this conspiracy goes, and subscribe to see more stories about the thin line between justice and vengeance. David, who had placed sophisticated listening devices in the cabin days earlier, learned of the plan to eliminate Wilson. He immediately contacted the officer, warning him to be careful and trust no one, especially within the department. Wilson agreed to wear a wire to his next meeting with Captain Reeves, believing that recording their conversation would provide insurance against becoming the next victim in the escalating purge. With equipment provided by David, Wilson arrived at Reeves' office for their scheduled meeting, the recording device concealed professionally enough to evade standard detection methods. The conversation began routinely with Reeves, discussing patrol adjustments and upcoming court appearances, but gradually shifted to more sensitive topics. "We need to address the Phillips situation," Reeves said, after closing his office door and activating a white noise generator to prevent eavesdropping. "His lawyer is making noise about a deal with the DA." Wilson carefully steered the conversation toward Maya's case, asking questions that would elicit incriminating responses. "Are we still maintaining the friendly fire story for Jackson?" "Some of the patrol officers are asking questions about the ballistics report." Reeves' response provided exactly the evidence needed. "The report is handled. Judge Slater made sure the lab processed the right version. Stick to the statement we prepared. Jackson got in the way during a legitimate operation. Unfortunate, but unavoidable." As Wilson pressed for more details, Reeves grew suspicious, studying the younger officer with narrowed eyes. "You've been quiet lately. Not your usual self since the shooting." He moved casually around his desk, opening a drawer with deliberate slowness, almost like something's weighing on your conscience. With sudden violence that belied his administrative position, Reeves drew a weapon from the drawer and aimed it at Wilson. "You're wearing a wire, aren't you? Harmon's people saw you at the federal building." Wilson's denial came too late. Reeves fired twice, hitting Wilson in the chest, and shouldered the shots muffled by a suppressor attached to the weapon. "Should have stuck with the program," Reeves muttered, approaching to confirm the kill. What he didn't know was that David was monitoring the transmission from a van parked near the precinct, having anticipated potential betrayal. When the audio feed cut out after gunshots, David implemented an emergency extraction plan, entering the building through a service entrance using access codes Wilson had provided. He navigated the precinct's back corridors with the confidence of someone who had studied the building's layout extensively, avoiding security cameras positioned throughout the building. He reached Reeves's office moments after the captain had stepped out to establish his alibi, finding Wilson bleeding but conscious on the floor. Despite his own gunshot wound from their confrontation at Wilson's home days earlier, David managed to help Wilson out through the same service corridors, leaving behind no evidence of their escape beyond bloodstains that Reeves would need to explain. Reeves returned to discover Wilson missing, setting off an internal manhunt based on the fiction that Wilson had attacked him and escaped. The department mobilized under this false narrative, unaware they were searching for a man who was actually a victim rather than an assailant. While recovering from his wounds in a safe house David had prepared, Wilson recorded a comprehensive statement detailing the corruption network Maya's murder and Captain Reeves' attempt to silence him. Though unconscious through much of the extraction, he believed both he and David had died in the attempt, unaware that they had successfully escaped the precinct. David received unexpected help from Marcus Davis and community members who recognized him from Maya's volunteer work. The neighborhood that had suffered most under the corrupt officers' regime now formed a protective network around the man fighting to expose them, hiding him in a series of safe houses as he recovered from the gunshot wounds sustained. During Wilson's rescue, these were not the luxury apartments or suburban homes where police would expect to find a middle-class professional like David, but modest residences in areas officers had written off as hostile territory, places where patrol cars rarely ventured except in force. During this period of recovery, David gained deeper understanding of Maya's community impact. Residents shared stories of how she had intervened when other officers escalated situations unnecessarily, how she had started a tutoring program for teenagers targeted by the department's aggressive enforcement, and how she had been building bridges between police and residents before her investigation made her a threat. She believed things could change, explained Mrs. Washington, a 73-year-old community matriarch who had lived in Riverside since the civil rights era. Even when we told her the system was rotten to the core, she kept trying to make it better from inside. David learned how the corrupt officers had systematically destroyed black lives through false arrests that created criminal records preventing employment and housing opportunities. He heard from parents whose children had been pushed into the school-to-prison pipeline through minor infractions that would have merited warnings in white neighborhoods but resulted in arrests in Riverside. The human cost of the corruption became personal in a way that transcended even his grief over Maya, expanding his mission from personal vengeance to a fight for justice that his wife had died believing possible. Sergeant Tamara Wright, connecting the attacks on corrupt officers to David's disappearance, tracked him down through her own community contacts. Instead of the arrest he anticipated when she appeared at the door of his current safe house, she offered partnership and crucial new information. "I'm not here to stop you," she explained, showing her empty hands as she entered. "I'm here because you need to know what you're really fighting." She shared documents from an internal database, showing connections between Judge Slater's Senator Harmon and Cornerstone Corrections Corporation, a private prison company that had donated heavily to both men's campaigns. The company had built 3 facilities in the state over the past decade, each requiring 90% occupancy rates to maintain profitability, according to their public financial disclosures. The officers were incentivized to make arrests in specific neighborhoods, Tamara explained, showing David internal memos with arrest quotas broken down by district. More arrests meant higher occupancy. Higher occupancy meant more profit. More profit meant bigger donations to political campaigns and judicial appointments. The racism made it easy to target black neighborhoods without public outcry, but this was always about money. The revelation expanded David's understanding of what Maya had uncovered. This wasn't just corrupt officers exploiting their power or even institutional racism operating unchecked. This was a calculated business model that commodified black bodies for corporate profit, using the language of law and order to disguise naked exploitation. The system that had killed Maya was larger and more entrenched than even she had realized, with tendrils reaching into state government courts and corporate boardrooms. As David absorbed this information, his approach shifted from targeting individual officers to exposing the entire corrupt ecosystem that had made Maya's murder not just possible, but inevitable when she threatened their operation. "We need to take it all down," he told Tamara, his voice steady with renewed purpose. "Not just the officers, the whole system." With 3 officers neutralized, and Wilson now cooperating with state investigators from his hospital bed, Captain Reeves and Judge Slater accelerated their plan to eliminate all evidence. They couldn't risk a prolonged investigation that might expose connections to Senator Harmon or Cornerstone Corrections Corporation, whose executives had begun distancing themselves through carefully worded statements about zero tolerance for impropriety in law enforcement partnerships. Judge Slater used his authority to approve a hastily prepared warrant, allowing officers to transfer all evidence related to ongoing drug investigations to a more secure facility due to alleged concerns about evidence tampering. Captain Reeves personally supervised the transfer, ensuring that specific items connected to Maya's investigation were included in the materials removed from the main evidence storage. 24 hours later, a fire broke out in the temporary evidence storage location, destroying thousands of items related to pending cases and killing 2 junior officers who had been assigned overnight security. The department officially declared the fire a tragic accident caused by electrical system failure, but first responders reported smelling accelerants that mysteriously disappeared from the fire inspector's report after Judge Slater requested special handling of the investigation. This callous sacrifice of fellow officers to protect their criminal enterprise turned much of the department against them. Officers who had previously remained silent out of misguided loyalty or fear began quietly cooperating with state investigators, providing corroborating testimony about altered reports, missing evidence, and the systematic targeting of black neighborhoods. A divide emerged within the department between those aligned with Captain Reeves and a growing faction, disgusted by the realization that their leaders considered even police lives expendable. David, now working with both Sergeant Wright and Marcus Davis, shifted his strategy from personal vengeance to exposing the entire corrupt system. He recognized that neutralizing individual officers had created important pressure points, but dismantling the infrastructure that enabled their crimes required a more comprehensive approach. Maya tried working within the system, and they killed her for it. He acknowledged during a strategy session in Marcus's community center office. Going after them one by one feels righteous, but it won't change the system that replaces them with new corrupt officers. Together, they coordinated with Rebecca Chen to prepare a comprehensive exposé revealing everything from street-level brutality to the political and financial beneficiaries of the racist policing practices. Chen worked with legal experts to ensure the evidence they provided could withstand inevitable attempts to discredit it, creating secure channels for whistleblowers to come forward with additional testimony. The growing coalition represented a partnership between community activists who had been fighting for change from outside the system, honest officers working for reform from within, and David's unique skills and motivation. Senator Harmon, learning of the imminent exposé through sources in the media, recognized the existential threat to his political career and criminal enterprises. During an emergency meeting at his lakeside cabin, he ordered Captain Reeves to eliminate everyone connected to the investigation, starting with Sergeant Wright, whose access to departmental records made her particularly dangerous. Make it clean this time, he instructed his political mask, slipping to reveal the coldness beneath. No theatrics, no messages, just accidents and disappearances that don't connect to each other. Reeves, whose position and freedom now depended entirely on Senator Harmon's protection, agreed despite his private concerns about the escalating violence. He assigned trusted officers still loyal to him to conduct surveillance on Wright, identifying patterns in her movements that would allow for an ambush away from witnesses. The opportunity came when Wright left the precinct late one evening, after copying additional files from the secure server. Reeves personally led the ambush, wanting to ensure no mistakes in this critical operation. He and 2 officers in unmarked vehicles boxed in Wright's car on an isolated stretch of road leading to her apartment complex. What they didn't know was that David had anticipated this move based on his understanding of how authoritarian systems respond when threatened. He had been monitoring Wright's movements and recognized the surveillance pattern that preceded most state-sponsored eliminations he had witnessed abroad. When Reeves approached Wright's vehicle with weapon drawn, David intervened from a concealed position, creating momentary confusion that allowed Wright to take cover. The ensuing confrontation turned into a gun battle that left Reeves' backup officers wounded, but alive, demonstrating David's continued restraint in using lethal force despite the escalating stakes. As Reeves and David faced each other in the rain-slick street, illuminated by flickering streetlights and the pulsing emergency lights of Wright's vehicle, Reeves revealed information calculated to destroy David's composure. "I watched the light go out in her eyes," he said, describing Maya's final moments in graphic detail. "She begged for her life at the end, mentioned your name, said you'd never stop looking for whoever did it." The psychological warfare nearly worked, almost pushing David into the vengeance-driven response that would have made him no better than those he hunted. His finger tightened on the trigger, the line between justice and vengeance blurring in his grief-stricken mind. It was Wright who stopped him, her voice cutting through his rage with the clarity Maya had always valued. "This isn't what she died for," David Wright called from behind her vehicle. Maya wanted justice, not revenge. We need him alive to testify. The moment of decision crystallized the fundamental question that had driven David since finding Maya's hidden evidence. Was he seeking justice for a broken system, or personal vengeance for a broken heart? The distinction mattered not, just philosophically but practically. Killing Reeves would provide emotional satisfaction, but potentially damage the larger case against the corruption network. Capturing him alive could lead to testimony that would bring down Judge Slater and Senator Harmon, fulfilling Maya's larger mission. David chose the harder path, lowering his weapon and using non-lethal techniques to subdue Reeves. They extracted a recorded confession implicating Judge Slater and Senator Harmon, with Reeves admitting to ordering Maya's murder at their direction and orchestrating the evidence room fire to cover their tracks. The confession included details about the financial arrangements with Cornerstone Corrections Corporation that incentivized arrests and convictions regardless of guilt. As they prepared to take Reeves into custody, coordinating with state investigators who hadn't been compromised by Senator Harmon's influence, the captain made one last desperate move. He had concealed a backup weapon in an ankle holster, drawing it with the practiced speed of someone who had prepared for this contingency. The sudden threat forced David to make another split-second choice between his own survival and Reeves' testimony. His CIA training took over his body, responding before conscious thought could intervene. 3 rapid shots ended Captain Reeves' life, and with it the direct testimony that could have simplified their case against the larger conspiracy. The immediate threat was eliminated, but at significant cost to their legal strategy. As sirens approached and Wright secured the scene, David confronted the reality that justice rarely follows a clean, straight line. Sometimes it zigzags through moral gray areas, forcing impossible choices between competing goods. Maya had believed in working within the system until that system killed her. David had sought vengeance until he recognized the need for systemic change. Now they would need to find another way to expose the corruption that had taken Maya's life and destroyed countless others in Riverside's marginalized communities. Judge Martin Slater and Senator Victor Harmon activated their considerable political resources in a coordinated counteroffensive designed to discredit the growing evidence against them. They convened an emergency press conference on the steps of the county courthouse, strategically positioning themselves before American flags and surrounded by uniformed officers still loyal to their faction. The imagery was carefully crafted to equate criticism of them with attacks on patriotism and law enforcement. Senator Harmon, his silver hair perfectly coiffed and his expression appropriately grave, stood at the microphone, projecting the practiced sincerity that had won him 5 consecutive elections. What we're witnessing is nothing short of a conspiracy of lies against the dedicated men and women who protect our communities, he declared, his resonant voice carrying the authority of his office. Radical anti-police activists have fabricated evidence to undermine public confidence in our justice system during an election year. This coordinated attack threatens the safety of all citizens and disrespects the memory of Detective Maya Jackson, who gave her life in the line of duty. Judge Slater followed with a statement that preemptively discredited any allegations against the court system, invoking judicial independence and the presumption of innocence that he had selectively applied throughout his career. Our courts have become a battlefield for political agendas, he intoned solemnly. We cannot allow unsubstantiated accusations to undermine the rule of law. Any evidence allegedly implicating judicial officers should be viewed with extreme skepticism when it originates from individuals with obvious anti-establishment motivations. Their performance was masterful, activating networks of political allies, media connections, and law enforcement organizations to rally in their defense. Police unions issued statements condemning the witch hunt against officers, while political commentators friendly to Senator Harmon questioned the timing of the allegations so close to election season. Conservative media outlets ran segments suggesting the entire controversy was manufactured by radical elements seeking to defund police departments. David Tamra Wright and their allies recognized the urgent need to release their evidence before this narrative became entrenched in public consciousness. They had anticipated this response, but were racing against opponents with established platforms and institutional credibility. Rebecca Chen published the first part of her exposé on an independent news site with rigorous fact-checking standards, including bodycam footage showing Wilson shooting Maya under Captain Reeves's direction. The footage directly contradicted the official friendly fire narrative, clearly showing Maya being lured to an abandoned building rather than participating in a drug bust gone wrong. Most damning was audio capturing Reeves, instructing Wilson to make it clean, and references to keeping the judge happy. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Community members who had long experienced the department's discriminatory practices saw confirmation of what they had always known. Protests erupted citywide demanding accountability, with particularly large gatherings outside the precinct where Maya had worked and the courthouse where Judge Slater presided. The footage went viral nationally, drawing attention from federal officials concerned about civil rights violations. Senator Harmon responded by deploying his most extreme countermeasure, activating private security contractors previously used for protection during overseas trips. These operatives, many former military with specialized training similar to David's, were tasked with hunting down David and retrieving any remaining evidence before it could be released. Their methods were not constrained by legal niceties or departmental regulations, creating a shadow force operating outside official channels. A series of increasingly violent confrontations erupted across the city, as these contractors targeted locations associated with David Wright, Marcus Davis, and Rebecca Chen. An arson attempt at the community center was thwarted by Neighborhood Watch volunteers. Chen narrowly escaped an attempted abduction outside her apartment building. The security contractors' aggressive tactics created escalating chaos, which Senator Harmon cynically exploited by calling for emergency measures to restore order in the face of anarchist violence. The governor, a political ally dependent on Harmon's support for his legislative agenda, declared a state of emergency, ironically empowering the very people responsible for creating the crisis. With expanded emergency powers, Judge Slater signed orders authorizing warrantless searches of suspected agitators, creating legal cover for the contractors to intensify their operations. David recognized the pattern from destabilization campaigns he had witnessed in developing democracies, where corrupt officials manufactured crises to justify extraordinary powers that protected their positions. The playbook was familiar, but seeing it deployed in an American city rather than a foreign capital brought home the fragility of systems he had once believed unshakable. Judge Slater, sensing the tide turning against them despite their aggressive countermeasures, attempted to save himself by betraying Senator Harmon. The judge had survived decades in the corrupt system by recognizing when to abandon sinking ships, and he calculated that Harmon's increasingly desperate tactics were creating unacceptable exposure. He reached out to David through an intermediary, offering a comprehensive evidence package against the senator in exchange for immunity from prosecution. The judge says he was just following orders, the intermediary explained during a clandestine meeting in the church where Maya's funeral had been held. He has documentation of every payment, every case, fixed every connection to Cornerstone. He's willing to testify that Harmon was the architect of the entire operation. David agreed to meet Slater, recognizing the value of his testimony, despite personal revulsion at negotiating with someone who had authorized Maya's murder. They arranged to meet at a hotel outside city limits neutral territory away from Harmon's surveillance network. The meeting was ambushed minutes after it began, with Harmon's security contractors breaching the room with tactical precision that suggested inside information. David and Judge Slater found themselves in an unlikely temporary alliance, fighting their way out of the hotel through service corridors as bullets shattered the upscale decor around them. During their escape, as they crouched behind an overturned room service cart while contractors searched the hallway ahead, Slater made a confession that stopped David cold. "I did authorize the Jackson operation," he admitted, his judicial composure cracking under stress, "but it was Harmon who demanded it. She had connected the department to the courts, but she was getting too close to his Senate office. If she had traced the money all the way to him, the whole system would have collapsed." The admission confirmed what David had suspected, but couldn't prove Maya's murder hadn't been merely about protecting corrupt officers or even judicial misconduct. She had threatened a political power structure that extended beyond Westport, with connections to state government and corporate interests that dwarfed the local operations. Harmon has federal connections too. Slater continued, revealing deeper corruption than even David had imagined. Homeland Security contracts federal grants directed to friendly districts. The drug operation is just one revenue stream. There's government money, campaign finances, correctional contracts. It's bigger than you know. The revelation both clarified their mission and complicated it enormously. They weren't just fighting corrupt local officials, but confronting a multi-layered system of legal, political, and financial interests, dependent on maintaining the status quo. As David processed this information, calculating how it changed their strategic approach, Gunfire erupted from the corridor ahead. The contractors had found them. David made another in a series of impossible choices, deciding whether to protect a corrupt judge whose testimony could bring down the larger conspiracy, or abandon him to save himself. The fact that Slater had authorized Maya's murder pulled him toward abandonment, but the potential for justice on a scale Maya could only have dreamed of argued for protection. In the split second available for decision, David chose justice over vengeance once again, pushing Slater into a service elevator while he provided covering fire to delay the contractors. As the elevator doors closed on the judge's surprised face, David turned to face pursuers who represented the enforcement arm of corruption that had taken Maya from him. The confrontation would determine not just his survival, but whether the evidence Slater carried would ever reach those with the authority and integrity to act on it. The final confrontation unfolded at Westport Central Courthouse, where Senator Harmon had organized a press conference to announce emergency legislation empowering special law enforcement units to restore order amid the growing protests. The event was carefully staged to project strength and authority, with the senator surrounded by political allies and the remaining officers loyal to his faction. The courthouse's marble columns and formal architecture provided a backdrop that emphasized institutional power, while enhanced security measures created a perimeter that kept protesters at a distance deemed suitable for background noise without disrupting the senator's message. The press conference descended into chaos when Judge Slater unexpectedly appeared at the back of the room, disheveled from his escape and clutching a flash drive containing evidence against his former ally. Before security could remove him, Slater shouted accusations that electrified the assembled journalists. Harmon ordered the murder of Detective Jackson. "I have the proof right here." The senator's security detail immediately moved to Tex 1. Isolate Slater, but in the confusion, several community activists, including Marcus Davis, managed to break through the security perimeter. Harmon, recognizing the situation spiraling beyond his control, abandoned his prepared remarks and retreated into the courthouse with his private security contractors, taking Marcus and several other protesters as hostages to secure his escape route. The standoff transformed the courthouse from a symbol of justice into a literal battleground between corruption and accountability. Local police established a perimeter, but confusion about jurisdiction and chain of command created opportunities that David exploited to infiltrate the building. Using his military extraction training, he navigated through service areas and ventilation systems to gain position near where Harmon held the hostages in a third-floor judicial chamber. Sergeant Wright coordinated with honest officers to secure the building's exterior, ensuring that Harmon couldn't simply escape with the hostages as human shields. Inside the chamber, surrounded by the leather-bound law books and dark wood paneling that had witnessed countless perversions of justice, Senator Harmon revealed his true character without the political mask he had worn for decades. Pacing nervously as his security contractors secured doors and windows, he launched into a monologue that exposed motivations more complex than simple greed or racism. "None of you understand what's really at stake," he told the hostages, his carefully modulated political voice giving way to clipped, contemptuous tones. "This isn't about a few corrupt cops or even judicial appointments. This is about maintaining necessary order in a society that would collapse without structure." His explanation unfolded like a dark manifesto, revealing that beyond the prison profits and drug trafficking lay a more fundamental commitment to maintaining racial economic disparities. "Every functioning society needs an underclass," he continued, "the facade of democratic values completely abandoned. We need people desperate enough to work for subsistence wages, people who can't afford to challenge the system." The policing strategy wasn't just about filling prison beds or protecting drug territories. It was about keeping certain communities destabilized, ensuring they remained sources of cheap labor, and prevented from accumulating wealth or political power. The monologue exposed the systemic nature of the racism Maya had fought against, revealing it not as merely personal prejudice, but as deliberate economic strategy. Through the ventilation grate where he had positioned himself, David could see Marcus Davis among the hostages, his community organizing experience, evident in how he quietly reassured others while assessing potential exits. The situation escalated when Judge Slater, who had been captured while trying to reach state police with his evidence, was brought into the chamber by Harmon's contractors. The senator immediately accused him of betrayal, threatening him with the same fate as that meddling detective if he didn't surrender the flash drive containing their financial records. "You've always been weak," Martin Harmon sneered. too concerned with appearances. This business requires stomach, not conscience. As Harmon berated, the judge David communicated with Wright via a secure channel, coordinating a response that would minimize risk to hostages while preventing Harmon's escape to the helicopter he had standing by on the courthouse roof. The plan required precise timing and depended on creating a distraction that would divide the contractor's attention at the critical moment. Judge Slater, perhaps seeking redemption or simply self-preservation, provided the needed distraction by suddenly lunging toward a contractor attempting to seize his weapon. The move was doomed to fail given Slater's age and lack of training, but it created the moment of chaos David needed to breach the room from two entry points simultaneously. In the ensuing confusion, one of the contractors fired reflexively, hitting Marcus Davis in the shoulder as he pushed other hostages toward cover. David faced an immediate tactical choice between pursuing Harmon, who used the distraction to flee toward the stairwell leading to the roof, or stopping to help Marcus, whose wound was bleeding profusely. The decision represented the culmination of his personal journey from vengeance to justice. The David who had begun this mission might have pursued Harmon without hesitation, prioritizing retribution for Maya above all else. But the man who had come to understand the community his wife had served made a different choice, applying pressure to Marcus's wound while directing other freed hostages to safety. "Go," Marcus urged him, recognizing the hesitation. "Don't let him get away. We've come too far." With emergency services responding to Wright's call and hostages moving toward safety, David resumed pursuit, following Harmon's path toward the helipad established on the courthouse roof. The senator had received military training decades earlier during a brief National Guard service that he frequently referenced in campaign materials, making him more dangerous than the typical politician. He had also retained enough physical conditioning to reach the roof well ahead of his security detail, who had been delayed by Wright's coordinated police response. The final confrontation between David and Senator Harmon occurred on the helipad as rain began to fall, darkening the concrete and creating treacherous footing. The helicopter pilot, seeing the armed standoff developing wisely, remained at a hover rather than attempting to land. Harmon, believing himself still untouchable despite the collapse of his security network, attempted negotiation from a position of imagined strength. "You're a practical man, Jackson," he called over the helicopter's whine. "We can make arrangements. Money, power, whatever you want. This doesn't have to end badly for either of us." When David advanced without response, weapon trained steadily despite the rain now falling in sheets, Harmon revealed one last secret calculated to shake his pursuer's resolve. "Your wife wasn't just investigating local corruption," he shouted. "She had connected our operation to federal agencies. That's why this went beyond local law enforcement. Her death wasn't just about protecting my interests. There were national security implications that she didn't understand. Some of your former employers were involved, Jackson. The people who trained you, who you served loyally for decades." The revelation momentarily stunned David, creating doubt about whether Maya's death had been ordered by some of the same agencies he had served throughout his career. The possibility that his own former organization might have connections to the corruption network challenged everything he believed about his previous service. This moment of hesitation gave Harmon the opportunity he needed. The senator lunged forward, tackling David with surprising strength for a man his age. They struggled at the edge of the rooftop, the rain making their grip uncertain as they fought for control of David's weapon. Harmon nearly succeeded in pushing David over the edge, using his slightly heavier build and desperate energy to gain momentary advantage. At the crucial moment, with his body partially suspended over a 5-story drop, David found clarity about the choice that had been building throughout his campaign against Maya's killers. He could kill Harmon, satisfying the vengeance that had initially driven him, or he could subdue him to face justice through the legal system Maya had believed in despite its flaws. In that moment of decision, he honored Maya's commitment to justice over vengeance, using a complex grappling technique to reverse their positions without sending either man over the edge. He subdued Harmon with restraint that would have made Maya proud, securing him with zip ties as Wright and state police officers reached the roof. Was this truly justice, or just the beginning of a longer fight? Let me know in the comments if you think David made the right choice by sparing Senator Harmon's life. Did Maya's belief in the system deserve his loyalty even after that system failed her? Hit like if this story of vengeance and justice moved you. Subscribe for more true crime narratives that explore corruption in our institutions, and share this video with anyone who believes that one person can make a difference against a corrupt system. In the aftermath, some measure of justice was achieved through channels Maya would have recognized. The corrupt officers were prosecuted based on evidence David and Wright had gathered. Judge Slater, recovering from injuries sustained during the courthouse confrontation, provided comprehensive testimony about the corruption network in exchange for a reduced sentence. Senator Harmon faced multiple federal charges, his political career ended, and his legacy rewritten from respected statesman to criminal conspirator. The Department of Justice launched a pattern or practice investigation into Westport's police department, resulting in a consent decree that mandated comprehensive reforms in training, accountability, and community engagement. David established a foundation in Maya's name to support police accountability and racial justice initiatives, working alongside Marcus Davis to heal community police relations that had been deliberately damaged by corrupt officials pursuing profit through exploitation. The foundation provided scholarships for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement and legal advocacy, creating pathways for systemic change from within. The final scene found David visiting Maya's grave on what would have been their anniversary, placing her favorite sunflowers against the headstone that identified her as Detective Wife Champion of Justice. He spoke quietly about the changes beginning in Westport developments she would have celebrated despite their incomplete nature. The system is still flawed, he told her, but people are fighting to make it better, just like you always did. As he left the cemetery, his phone notified him of an encrypted message delivered through channels only Maya would have known to use. The message contained files she had sent to a secured server before her death, evidence of similar corruption networks operating in cities across the country. Each network connected local police departments to judicial systems, political structures, and private interests, profiting from racially targeted enforcement. Maya had discovered not just a local conspiracy, but a national pattern mapping connections she intended to expose before her murder. David studied the files with growing understanding that the fight for justice Maya had died for extended far beyond Westport. The work she had begun remained unfinished, waiting for those with courage to continue her mission. As rain began to fall again, David looked back at Maya's grave once more, before walking purposefully toward his car. The fight for justice, he realized, was far from over. Thank you for watching this story of corruption, vengeance, and the difficult path to true justice. If you found value in Maya and David's journey, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell to support more content that examines the broken systems in our society. Comment below with your thoughts on whether justice was truly served, and share this video to spark important conversations about police accountability and systemic racism. Until next time, remember that real change requires both courage and persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable corruption. This story illuminates the complex struggle for justice within systems corrupted by racism, greed, and power. Maya's murder represents how institutions meant to protect can become weapons against those who challenge their dysfunction. David's journey from revenge seeker to justice advocate demonstrates that true change requires balancing righteous anger with principled action. The corruption revealed wasn't just about racist individuals, but systematic exploitation designed to maintain economic and racial hierarchies. This illuminates how racism functions not merely through personal prejudice, but through interconnected systems that profit from inequality. We see that accountability rarely comes from within broken institutions. Change required a coalition of insiders like Tamara, community organizers like Marcus, journalists like Rebecca, and catalysts like David working together across different spheres of influence. The story challenges us to consider when working within systems is effective versus when those systems need complete restructuring. Maya believed in reform from within, while David initially sought vengeance outside the system, yet ultimately honored her vision by pursuing systemic justice. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative reminds us that confronting injustice is never complete. Like David discovering evidence of nationwide corruption networks, we must recognize that justice is an ongoing commitment requiring persistent vigilance, courage, and coalition building across communities. What would you have done in David's position? Would you have chosen the path of vengeance or justice? Has this story changed how you think about corruption in our institutions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this exploration of systemic racism and the fight for justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find this story. Subscribe to our channel for more narratives that shine light on uncomfortable truths in our society and the courage of those who stand against them. Have you witnessed